Good evening once again. Tonight we're
Jay.
here to talk about sales tax, one of our most significant sources of revenue for the general fund. A couple of months ago during one of the budget updates, we talked about the fact that we get a very detailed sales tax analysis every quarter. And it goes by vendor throughout the city, and we use this information to forecast going forward. And at that time you said, next time you get an update, can you come and present it to the council? And so we were able to do one better, and we got, like, called himself Mr. Sales Tax Guru or nerd, depending on how well you wanted to use it, from the state of California. But he is clearly one of the leading experts on this topic, and he's the one who actually prepares the report that we get every quarter. And so he's here tonight to give you a very reduced version of the huge report that we get, and then open it up for questions, because I would imagine you have a number as far as what's going to go on with us in the future regarding sales tax. So with that, let me introduce you Doug Jensen from MuniServices, and I will turn it over to him.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here. MuniServices works for about 800 cities throughout the country, and we track about 85% of the state sales tax database. That gives us a very unique insight into the economic nature of many cities throughout the country. I'm going to give you a couple snapshots of your sales tax base and recent performance, but I really want to focus on some of the trends that we're seeing that will impact future revenues. This is a snapshot of the fourth quarter of 2016. So this is the holiday sales quarter. This is when the retailers want to make as much money as they possibly can. And we're comparing to the fourth quarter of 2015. And we show the city of Roseville, the Sacramento Valley as a whole, and then statewide to give you a little bit of a glimpse into things. Your general retail sector actually performed quite well. Many cities this quarter, about half of the cities in California actually, saw a contraction in the general retail base during this holiday quarter. The food products and transportation continue to be very robust. Below that line is a little more detail. So your number one sales tax generator as an economic segment is new auto sales, and they continue to see very nice growth of 5% quarter over quarter. Your department stores was a rare anomaly for department stores. Most department stores throughout the state were down. Well, you can see the statewide total actually contracted 1.3. And if you look at the news from time to time, you see that Sears, JCPenney's, Macy's, they're struggling. They're losing market share to internet transactions. And we'll talk a little bit about the internet in a minute. Restaurants, very robust growth, 4.4. Used auto sales, 10.2. Electronic equipment was actually a very large positive payment in the fourth quarter of 2015. So this really wasn't a real economic anomaly. It was just a payment anomaly. So if you factor out that large one-time, Roseville was actually up 2.9% in total for this quarter. So good numbers still coming in. Do I have oh, very good. This is a quarterly performance analysis of your sales tax base. On the left, the gray bars are the quarterly sales tax revenues that you receive. You can see the importance of that fourth quarter. It's your largest revenue quarter. The lines are correlated to the economic categories. We're going back 5 years of history on this report, and you can see the red line. Those peaks are the fourth quarter. That clearly shows how important that fourth quarter is to general retailers. And general retailers, by the way, are your department stores, apparel stores, shoe stores, jewelry stores, bookstores, that type of traditional retail. And then the trends in retail are not showing up yet in Roseville, but we're clearly seeing in other areas of the state shifting in spending patterns. The younger age group, the millennials, tend to spend more on experiences, travel, puzzle rooms, things like that, that are non-taxable. So they would rather have an experience that's often non-taxable versus buying shoes or a handbag. And then the food products, I think we're going to experience pretty robust growth going forward because you can't buy a good meal online yet. I always throw that yet in. It might be a drone someday, drop in a prepared meal on our porch. But business to business, I mentioned that you can see that really large spike, same quarter prior year. That black line is what's called the county pool. That's where the internet sales that are collected usually end up going into that county pool. And we actually saw growth in internet retail sales slow a little bit this quarter. on average up between 8 to 15%, depending on the retailer. In prior years, it was up 15 to 20 and sometimes 30% growth quarter over quarter for some of the major online retailers. This is a look at the city's sales tax per capita, broken down by economic category. It's each year's sales tax revenue divided by that year's population, and these are unadjusted for inflation, and you can see the steep drop from 2007 to 2009 as a result of the Great Recession. And you can see if you look on that red section of the bar, retail never really quite recovered, especially on an unadjusted for inflation basis. And really the only category that is above pre-recession levels are food products, which have the social gathering hub aspect and the inflationary growth, as well as the experience of going out to a restaurant. Transportation still hasn't gotten back to pre-recession levels. Transportation are primarily your service stations and auto sales. So we still have a ways to go. The recent drop is the effect of lower gas prices had on sales tax receipts in the transportation category. We also carve out what we call geographical subsets of the citywide database, and we track the Galleria, Creekside Mall, the Auto Mall, and the Fountains. And you can see how the recovery in the auto industry has fared incredibly well for the city of Roseville. Car prices have escalated. The post-recession pent-up demand grew your auto sales on average of 11% over the last 10 years, or since 2009, I apologize. About 80% of the increase for the city sales tax base came from auto sales, so it's a very, very key part. But what we're seeing now is that supply and demand is closer to equilibrium, which means the number of buyers in the market can support a certain amount of sales. And April and May of this year, you track that the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis tracks the number of units sold on an annualized basis. And in April and May, it's dropped to 16.88 million. It's the first drop in that measurement in 7 years. So, and then you're starting to see incentives offered, which indicates a little more difficulty moving inventory, but not expecting it to, drop off like we saw in past recessions. In fact, the 2.5% to 5% growth in the out years is probably going to be a pretty good number. You can see the Galleria, that little drop back in 2011, I believe, was the fire, and then some of the repositioning of the tenants. It's still a very large destination mall. People come from all over. It's doing very well. But malls will continue to have to evolve to add entertainment and experience and continue to make them the destination. And then the other thing on retail is that retail's somewhat been overbuilt in the United States. The United States has 26 square feet per capita of gross leasable retail space. Second in the world is Canada at 16, but the United States has more than Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and the UK combined. And analysts are expecting over the next 10 years, the United States going from 1,200 super regional malls to 900 super regional malls. So it's this contraction of the need for the space. Thank you to the internet, right? This is where a lot of that movement has gone from brick and mortar to internet sales. You can see that gray line starting back in 1999, the percentage of e-commerce retail sales, of all retail sales, was only 0.6%. It is now 8.3%, and it's growing between 0.5% to 1% a year. And the green line is the city of Roseville's general retail revenue over that same period of time. So really kind of flattened out. So it's a cannibalization, if you will, from the internet from brick and mortar. The blue line is just your total sales tax revenue. The next page, we looked at some of the top brick and mortar department stores that have brick and mortar in the city, and we're showing the fourth quarter of 16 over fourth quarter of 15. And then we're also showing what their .com sales did during that period of time. Now, Amazon, I put no storefront or not applicable yet. There is some movement from Amazon to do these small little stores and pop-up retail. I think it's more of a marketing gimmick Their meat and potatoes is still going to be in internet sales. Their .com was up 25.9% in Sacramento and Placer County. It was down a little bit in other areas. The thing with Amazon is they are only fulfilling about half of the sales that they sell. The other half are fulfilled by third-party affiliates who are not collecting sales tax. So if you ever buy anything from Amazon, there's no sales tax on your bill. That indicates it was fulfilled by an affiliate. On that last chart, by the way, September of 2012 is when California passed legislation to start collecting sales tax from Amazon. And then nationwide, there's $23 billion of uncollected sales tax revenues nationwide. There's 2 federal bills that could change that. The Marketplace Fairness Bill and the Tax Parity Bill are 2 bills in Congress. They were just reintroduced April 27th by a bipartisan commission to allow states to require online retailers to collect that state sales tax, including the local tax. And we estimate that Roseville loses about $3.2 million annually from uncollected sales tax on internet sales. Now, technically, when you buy something from out of state online and you don't pay the sales tax, technically you still owe the use tax on your state income tax return. I won't ask anybody in this room to raise their hand on who does. This next chart is the other kind of force, if you will, in what we're seeing in the future of sales tax. We broke out the Bureau of Labor Statistics annual spending survey into what's taxable and what's not taxable. And right now, we're looking at about 33% of U.S. spending as being subject to our sales tax in California, and 67% not. And the boomers, that bar on the right, roughly the boomers. BLS doesn't break it down precisely in the generational cohort, but you can see as those boomers are getting older, if you asked a boomer, did you buy a lawn service or did you buy a lawn mower? Service not taxable, lawn mower taxable. Most are going to say a lawn service. So that's shifting away from taxable. The left hand is the millennials. So there's 70 million boomers and 80 million millennials in the United States, and millennials, again, the trend right now is to shop online and buy experiences and save money. I think they're coming of that age, coming out of that recession, where they have a lot of characteristics like the 1920s. Folks that lived through my grandparents, for example, lived through the Great Recession, who became very frugal. So you see some of those tendencies in the millennials. Not my 2 daughters, but some structural frailties. So my favorite line is California implemented the state sales tax in 1933. The only changes to it were to add hundreds of pages of exemptions. At the time of implementation, there were 3 exemptions. 1933 was the year we built the Golden Gate Bridge. So that kind of gives you perspective of how old this law is. It really hasn't kept pace with the changing economy. In 1933, we were a goods economy. We were a Main Street business economy. We're far from that now, and it hasn't quite adapted. And then you add these exemptions. And the local 1% Bradley Burns, their general fund sales tax revenue, statewide is $3.2 billion of cost of those exemptions. And if Roseville is about 0.75% of all statewide sales tax, that means of that $3.2 billion, the cost of exemptions in Roseville is about $24 million annually. So, and if you need to sleep tonight, read SBE Publication 61. It's full of great information. So I did the Tale of Two Cities. I did the largest city in Texas and the largest city in California. There's a little bit better rate of growth in Houston than there is Los Angeles, because in Houston, they tax services. They also tax utilities. And they don't have, believe it or not, they don't have nearly as many of exemptions. The next one is the Tale of Two Capitals. It's Austin and Sacramento. And you can see even a much wider tax receipt disparity on a tax structure in Texas versus a tax structure in California.
Because they tax services.
Yes, they have a much broader tax base. So what are some of the trends? Online sales are slowly siphoning away sales tax from brick and mortar. The experiential shopping is, I think, here to stay, and that's often non-taxable. So you're seeing a shifting of those consumer patterns, things like escape rooms and travel. I mentioned the generational cohorts having different spending patterns. Food products, we're expecting pretty good 5% growth in the out years, unless that drone business really takes off and they start dropping restaurant meals onto your doorstep. And then, you know, the fun thing about restaurants is being the social gathering hub. It also has that experience and this trend of taking a selfie with your entree and seeing how many, you know, likes you can get on Instagram or Facebook. It's what kids are doing these days, I suppose. Auto sales, again, accounted for a big part of the sales tax growth. And then the supply and demand is really close to equilibrium. The big pent-up demand's behind us. So 3% a good, solid number. New Car Dealers Association of California is expecting 2.5 to 5, so we're within that range. In construction in the region, Sacramento Valley really lagged the rest of the state in the recovery of the construction industry, but now we're seeing that really start to pick up. So we're pretty optimistic about construction, at least through 2019. There's a lot of projects in the pipeline. And then in business to business, you talked about the ERP system, and everything's going cloud system. So that means a lot less people buying network infrastructure. And the network infrastructure is going clustered into the areas of the state that have a lot of cloud computing, hosted network server farms in the Silicon Valley and so forth. So, you know, major network companies, resellers, are slowly losing the taxable sales. The other thing that we're seeing is the advancement in software. It used to be where you would buy a network package. Now you're not buying the network. You're not buying the phone systems anymore because the phone systems are software. And in California, software is not taxable. So shifting from hardware to software is definitely a trend that's going to have some impact on the business-to-business sector in Roseville. Finally, a look at our sales tax forecast. We're at 3% in 17, little gradual growth in 18, and then tapering off as we expect lower auto sales, lower retail, slightly lower construction, and lower to business. Nothing negative, but definitely a tapered growth scenario. So
Before I turn over, I'd like to say that your finance staff spends a great deal of time with this report. Behind this report is lots of data. And our goal the past couple of years is make a valiant attempt to make our budget accurate. So what we're trying to do is really forecast revenue so that we don't give you a budget that doesn't fairly represent how much money we have to spend. And so we spend a great deal of time on this, and as we've been talking about, we're looking at 2% or 2.7% growth next couple of years, and we're saying our expenses are going faster than that. That's been the major cause of why we're doing what we're doing with the budgets, because of that last chart that you just saw. We're trying to react to it before it happens. And so Doug has been an major influence in making this happen the past couple of years, is getting our budgets more accurate, and we're paying a great deal of attention to it. I can assure it's a big deal. I assure you it's a big deal in the finance department. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to you to see if you have any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
There was two figures that I wanted to make sure I understood. If we collected online sales tax, I saw a $24 million and a $3.2 million, and $3.2 million is what Roseville's missing out. Is that online sales? And I'm trying to figure out what's the $24 million part.
that's on it. Okay, so the $3.2 million is our estimated loss on online retail sales that are not being collected, or the sales tax is not being collected on. So
Where it could be collected, but it's not being collected because
That's right.
people aren't voluntarily.
that's right. The $23 million is the cost of exemptions, of all of the exemptions that the state legislature has passed over the last 100 years.
Yet Texas, that's really interesting.
Yep.
Okay, we got to remember that for Barry Broom and his group.
I have one question, and that is there, or what is the movement like, or is there any movement on the legislature moving to approve taxing services at some point.
Senator Hertzberg has introduced a bill each of the last 3 sessions to broaden the sales tax base to services. His first 2 introductions referred to a modest sales tax rate that was 3.75, which coincidentally is the state's general fund share of the sales tax rate, which would have carved out locals. His latest one is to include locals in the broadening of the tax base. My personal opinion, not reflected by MuniServices, but it's a huge tax increase to do it without lowering the rate. The Board of Equalization did an estimate. If you collected on all services, which wouldn't happen, you're not going to collect on rent and tuition and medical. Right? You have to keep necessities of life exempt, in my opinion. $122 billion tax increase if you were to tax all services. So it needs to be vetted out a lot further in terms of, you know, if you were to lower the rate and broaden the base, you'd probably get our sales tax rate down to around 4.5% and be revenue neutral.
What's the sales tax rate in Texas, Austin, Houston?
It's around 7.5%, 8%. Locals get about 2 percentage points instead of 1. Their local property tax is also 3% ad valorem instead of 1% ad valorem. So there's a much,
Right, our local jurisdictions get a lot less,
yeah.
which is some of the challenges.
California locals get much less
Right.
piece of the overall pie. Yeah.